Thank you for joining today's RISE Masterclass Introduction to Data. My name is Tiffany Pang and I'm a junior consultant at Turner & Townsend. We are joined today by Jonathan Newton at Turner & Townsend. This is a retrofit information support and expertise event, RISE, which is fully funded by the Department of Energy Security and Net Zero and delivered by Turner & Townsend. I will now hand over to John to start today's presentation.
Great, thank you, Tiff. Yeah, I'm a principal consultant at Turner & Townsend, so talking today about kind of introduction to data. Obviously, big topic. Quite a few slides to go through, so it is a little bit of a whistle-stop tour, but hopefully it gives you that kind of introduction on the type of data, how to deal with it, and how to store it going forward. Particularly looking at obviously in relation to kind of warm homes, whether that be local grant or social housing fund. So we'll get cracking. So agenda, yeah, so data, why is it important? What is the data process? What data do I need? Importantly, where can I find it? Where can I get it from? How do I collate and cleanse data? So good data versus bad. How do I now kind of analyze that and utilize it? And then kind of a brief summary, and then further resources about kind of further information you can utilize, whether that be kind of digging more into RDSAP or kind of some other areas. So data, why is it important? Hopefully you kind of you already know, and certainly data is becoming more and more important as kind of the years go on, particularly in retrofit. So yeah, why is it important? So investing in and better management of your data certainly unlocks, should I say, a kind of a wealth of other benefits. You would all have heard of the kind of saying in terms of rubbish in or rubbish out, or a version of that I can't say on this recording. But yeah, it's in terms of having that good data will help you kind of tracking, refining progress towards internal and regulatory standards. I'm sure you'll all be aware if you're working towards delivering kind of warm homes, the level of kind of data you're required to submit, whether that be on a monthly, quarterly, yearly basis, and be able to kind of report on that, not only obviously for the grants, but also up to kind of your senior leadership teams in terms of your internal strategies and maybe regulatory standards you need to meet as well. Being able to make the most of the opportunities when they arise. So having that data up front, a good quality and good understanding of your data, will help you with future funding waves, or just being able to make the most of opportunities as they arrive, rather than trying to scramble around, pulling together little scraps of data and you're unsure of it, and it makes your life harder later down the line. Identify where data is missing for the most cost-effective kind of surveying. So actually, rather than a blanket approach, can I target certain areas? Certainly helps to know where you've got good data and bad data. Helping for contractor activity, really important. The more data you have, the more you can provide to a contractor, the less likely they are to come back and say, this is wrong, it's going to cost you X% more. So yeah, and contractors really like having that upfront as well. It makes their life easier, and hopefully yours as well. Produce meaningful reports. Again, how are you reporting? It's all, I'm sure we've all been there in terms of having to provide a report, and you're not happy with the data set, but you've got to provide it, and it's not really very meaningful. You've got to caveat it with X, Y, and Z, and kind of develop a better delivery plan and kind of manage that delivery plan going forward. So that's why it's important. It really it's integral to the delivery of retrofit and at least a smooth program. So what is the data process? So this is the kind of general data process into data governance. So first thing you would need to think about is, what data do you need? So what factors are important to you or important as part of the project? So you may have kind of overlying strategies in terms of reaching certain targets. That might be EPCC. You might have further ones in terms of heat loss targets. You might have kind of more local authority net zero targets, and obviously kind of more wider encompassing government ones you've got to abide by. So what data do you need? Things like energy performance, EPC rating before and after, stock condition, information regarding the kind of the tenant or the resident in terms of their income or fuel poverty levels. So what data do you need in order to do your reporting, as well as, sorry, not even forgetting the kind of delivery aspect of it, costings, invoicing, etc. So where are you going to source that all from? So where can you get it? Do you have it already, or do you need to source it from either a kind of contractor or someone going out and getting that data for you, or is it kind of openly available via other kind of open source sites? Collecting your data, how you should be storing it. So there is massive amount of data you'll be collecting as part of a retrofit. You know, if you've seen what a retrofit assessment looks like, they are kind of megabytes in size, and that's just one document. And there are through the PAS process, there can be hundreds of documents. So how are you going to store all this, as well as the kind of the actual kind of XML files, the Excel files, wherever you're storing that kind of core data as well. So how are you going to collect it? How are you going to store it, so that it's not just in people's email boxes where it gets lost. Someone goes on holiday and no one knows what's happening or where the data sits. Cleansing the data, so you'll have multiple sources of data coming in, some from surveys, some from some historical data. How are you going to combine those? Some from kind of more open source data sets as well, or maybe even from kind of residents and tenants. How are you going to combine that together, cleanse it, get rid of the stuff that you know is wrong, identify areas of weaknesses, etc. Analyzing the data, so that's that kind of following through from that cleansing. Right, we're happy with it. Now, how does it help us deliver? So actually, can we target these certain areas? We're looking at hard to treats. We found those already through that kind of data cleansing. Are we focusing on particular archetypes, particular measure mixes that would work best with particular archetypes, whatever that may be? For instance, you may be looking at, we want to do a shared ground loop, ground source heat pump, and that's as focused is on the kind of high density flats, and therefore you use your data to help you target your projects. And then flows exactly into that kind of choosing your projects, and how does that then kind of fit, hopefully back to the start, in terms of, does it fit the strategy? Is the data that's coming out at the end useful? If not, go back to the start and work out where the data was missing, or where that process went wrong. So it's a kind of constantly evolving process. So the data governance, so we've got some key principles. These don't form kind of, a nice acronym. Normally, I obviously like to make them work in an acronym, but these are kind of key principles that it's always worth having in the back of your head, or making sure, does the data kind of flow through these key principles? So first one being accuracy. Is it correct, precise, and up to date? We all know there's always going to be levels to that. It's impossible to have 100% data accuracy across the board. It's never going to happen, but how close to that can you get, and how sure of your data are you? Completeness, all possible data is present, no gaps or blanks, and also identifying where you do have that. So for instance, if a lot of your data is coming from maybe open source EPC data, that maybe only contains 70% of the kind of total RD SAP data, so you'll be missing things like heat loss perimeters. Just being able to understand where there are gaps, where you can start collecting that maybe from other sources, or understand there are gaps, you need to go out and do some further surveys. Consistency, kind of no conflicting information with or between systems and attributes. Obviously there'll be different systems that you use if you're a kind of a social housing landlord or a local authority. There'll be certainly additional data that housing associations have necessarily over a local authority. So things like stock condition data versus EPC data, what was collected the most recently, what you're most confident on. For instance, have some of the stock condition surveys been done by a drive-by, and therefore you're a little bit unsure about those, versus maybe an EPC, or kind of vice versa. So using your kind of own internal knowledge as well of the accuracy of the data that's coming forward. Timeliness, kind of data is created, maintained, and available where required. So that's kind of, where's it stored? Is it easily accessible, so that when you need it, it's there, rather than having to kind of search through multiple spreadsheets different people hold different bits of information. Is it all stored in a nice and kind of easy and accessible format? Uniqueness, kind of where appropriate, there are no duplicates or kind of redundant data elements. There's also kind of the flip side of that, particularly on these kind of warm homes projects. You get maybe some kind of pre-EPCs and post-EPCs, and you don't necessarily, as part of the project, want to overwrite maybe a pre-EPC in your data sets, so that you can only see what it is now rather than what it was. Obviously, there's always ways of getting that data back, but ideally, you wouldn't be overwriting stuff that you need for your reporting purposes. And validity. So is the data authentic, proven to be valid, and derived from good, reliable sources? So things like an EPC survey. We all know that they're not always perfect, but in terms of reliability, there are kind of audit processes in the back of that, fire lodgement agents, etc. So you can be relatively secure that some of it has been followed at a minimum in terms of that validity. So where's the data coming from? How sure of you are you of it? So what data do I need? Obviously, this would be very dependent on your own project and your own kind of internal strategies and internal targets, but kind of some kind of key areas to focus on. So yeah, your organization strategy. Do you have targets over and above maybe the standard ones, things like the kind of EPCC to 2030? Do you have, I don't know, air tightness targets or heat loss targets, or particular kind of fuel poverty targets, which would require you to collect different data or additional data? Targeting strategy. So again, are you targeting kind of a fabric first approach, going back to that kind of strategy? Are you targeting maybe a kind of fuel poverty approach, and that will change maybe the type of archetypes? Are you kind of trying to get all your hard to treats done? So yeah, understanding there's certain areas you're looking to target because you can't do it all at once. Demographics of your residents and tenants, yes, certainly important. Well, across the board it's important, but particularly for things like local grant, where you've got kind of eligibility criteria, whether that might be particular areas, particular postcode areas, or kind of income eligibility, etc. Demographics are always important, and it's also important in terms of the type of measures you're putting in, and that kind of tenant and resident engagement plan that follows on from that. So certain types of residents, whether they kind of have additional needs, etc., will need additional or different, should I say, kind of engagement plans. So yeah, who you're targeting, how you're targeting them. Tenants will need a different type of engagement from owner occupiers, who will need a different type of engagement from the kind of private rented sector landlords. So yeah, how are you going about kind of targeting those and making sure that your plans fit with that? And then kind of existing barriers. So do you know where your conservation areas are? Are there listed buildings within the stock that you're looking at? Are they in kind of national parks, which again all have different kind of requirements on top of them? Additional information that you may be able to gather. This is where things like kind of local knowledge and colleagues come in as well. So things like the kind of the DNO in your area, and whether there's going to be previous projects and any issues in terms of, we're looking to do lots and lots of solar PV, but actually we were aware of that the grid is particularly strained in this area, and there's going to potentially be issues with the DNO. So we'll start that that engagement very early. Or we know all the properties in this area have I don't know, electric cables up them, so external wall insulation becomes difficult and requires DNO engagement, etc. So yeah, those are kind of existing barriers, whether you're getting that from kind of data sources or from sources kind of within your organization. So identifying what type of data you need. Obviously, there's lots and lots here. The kind of EPC and kind of RDSAP data is the principal kind of data set. I would suggest it collects a lot of the data points you'll be seeing here, but certainly not all. So things like property type, construction age, always worth checking construction age on EPCs if you've got some kind of more accurate data from your kind of own internal data sets, it can be a guess from a retrofit assessor who's going out, unless they've got kind of clear guidance on the age dates. They'll just be going by the kind of look of the property normally, and so that can be off. Detachments, flat positions, floor areas, again, certainly things that always worth double checking. Things like floor areas are often ones that if an EPC assessor has inputted something wrong, you'll be able to identify that normally through the EPC rating. Like I've seen ones in the past that have shown as A, and you go, well, none of the others in the area are A, and then you have a look and actually it's got a floor area of, I don't know, 12 meters squared, and it's clearly incorrect. So there's certainly checks you can be doing throughout the kind of the areas that you need. Wall construction, insulation types, things like wall insulation. Do you have additional information? For instance, we know that this is cavity wall insulation. However, it was installed 20 years ago. We're aware of particular issues of condensation and mold on the external walls, leading us to believe maybe that there are failed cavities there. So do you have additional information that wouldn't be captured as part of an EPC that you can bring in? Really, really useful. Roof type or roof insulation. Obviously, things like roof type are useful, particularly if you're doing things like solar PV. It will affect maybe brackets, etc., that you would have to utilize. Heating type, obviously very important in terms of this scheme and the type of works you can do. Again, things that won't be captured as part of an EPC. Tenure is actually. Conservation areas aren't, national parks aren't, listed heritage properties aren't. So they're the type of things you can bring in from alternative sources. Once you start getting into kind of the retrofit assessment, those do come in as well. So actually you've got the EPC data, but also on top of that, then you've got the kind of retrofit assessor information, which does start to capture some of that additional information there. But certainly won't be thinking about things like DNO, operator, kind of any planned work. So really interesting, particularly if you were within kind of high density urban areas. Are there any heat networks that are planned? That might certainly sway the type of works you look to do and look to focus on. There's no point in going fitting a load of air source heat pumps if 5 years down the line they're looking at fitting a massive heat network in that area. Really important, the kind of next box, the kind of socio-economic one, particularly on local grants. So you'll be getting that kind of eligibility information. So obviously I'm assuming you'll be aware of the kind of the different eligibility pathways. There are 3. So you've got eligible postcodes. Then you've got kind of in the kind of indices of the kind of multiple deprivation areas. You've got income proxies, so means tested benefits, households in receipt of special kind of tested benefits, or kind of the EcoFlex 2, the kind of EcoFlex options as well. And then you've got the kind of more income related ones as well. On top of that, just for everyone, it's always useful to understand the tenants or the residents within a property, because as I said previously, that will certainly impact, if not the type of measures you install, certainly how you engage about it. And if you fit in things like, I don't know, an air source heat pump with really intricate controls, but it's in a property that is kind of for like maybe, let's say, a supported property that with someone with a disability, you need to make sure that you're tailoring your advice, and even particularly things like controls, to the person that's in that property. So we know about all the kind of data that we need, and that's certainly not an exhaustive list. There will be more. Where can we get the data from? So there are, as I've said before, kind of open source databases where you can get a lot of this kind of straight away. So certainly things like EPC, RDSAP data is available across the country, kind of via the kind of EPC open source data site. It doesn't include all the RDSAP data, unhelpfully, but it does include a lot of it, and it certainly will get you most of the way in terms of understanding the kind of EPCs and the property types. You can look at kind of on-off gas areas. There's maps from the kind of grid operators that show you which areas are on and off gas, again helping you target whether you're doing air source heat pumps, whether you're doing reading gas switches. You've got the indices of multiple deprivation, obviously, as I said before, particularly important in terms of those postcode areas that access kind of one of the eligibility pathways in local grant. You can use things like English Housing Survey for a lot of information around tenure. There's fuel poverty open source data. Obviously, the local authorities will have data on their kind of conservation areas, national parks, listed buildings. Income is sometimes more difficult to come across, but there are kind of obviously ways, particularly if you're on, if you're a social landlord, you may have income information already, and particularly regarding benefits. If you're a local authority, you may be able to access that via the kind of DWP checks as well. Internal departments, I won't go into too much detail, but things like plan works, heat networks, what are the plans, kind of future plans in your area that would also relate to housing associations. That might be when you're doing new roofs, have you got a massive heat upgrade program for gas boilers where you're looking to do air source heat pumps? Make sure those are aligned. It's never good to do a load of solar PV projects and then your planned works team come to you and go, oh, we were just about to replace those roofs, can you take them all off, please? It does happen, but yeah, if you can get ahead of the game, certainly beneficial. Asset management systems, so you hopefully, and this is possibly more towards the social landlords, but in terms of having that stock condition survey data, EPC data, plan works data, hopefully it's within a system that you can all combine that together. Census data, again, there's lots of areas in terms of kind of age, household. So if you're doing like archetyping, really good to have that kind of census data as well, and local knowledge. So complaints, engagement preferences, feelings towards retrofit. Have you delivered retrofit in the past? Did you have particular kind of issues in certain areas because, I don't know, they've had issues in the past and now they're unsure about the type of work you're trying to do? That will certainly be really helpful. So I think it's something that does get forgotten, is that local knowledge, whether that be internal or external, but bringing that in can really help a kind of project delivery and understanding those pinch points or areas of difficulty. How do I cleanse data? So in terms of collecting your data, first and foremost, you know, once you've stored your data, you'll need to store. Once you've sourced your data, so to say, you'll need to store it kind of securely. As I said before, there is a vast amount of data that gets collected as part of kind of retrofit project, whether that be upfront or kind of throughout the project. So we've talked about a lot of that upfront data, but there's lots that you'll be collecting as part of the delivery of the project. So the retrofit assessments, there'll be technical surveys, they will be obviously the kind of works programs and kind of invoices and costing information, all of which will need to get fed back up through different reporting lines. How are you storing it? How are you ensuring it's kind of one version of the truth? There'll be multiple stakeholders, so you'll be internal, but you'll also have to be sharing data with your contractors. Do you have an ability to do that in a kind of sensible way? So cleansing your data, I think as we kind of previously discussed, kind of good quality data is when it's complete, valid, accurate, timely, unique, and consistent. So conduct logic checks. You will know your data or your area better than anyone else. So does the data kind of show, but this, again, there's certain things you could easily filter for. So for instance, cavity walls in pre-1900 properties, they may exist in certain kind of archetypes, but there's certain areas that you can kind of easily flag as this might be wrong. You can also flag kind of areas where you've got a row of terraces and they're all cavity and one solid wall. Again, same with flats, etc., or standout kind of EPC ratings. So again, you've got a kind of row of terraces, they're all EPC D. There's one that's a B or an A. There are ways you can filter data to do that. There's kind of logic checks, you can kind of consistency checks. So kind of do flats in the same block have the same construction age, have duplicates been removed? It's kind of certainly easy to get kind of duplicates with different URPNs potentially that end up being the same property. and then conduct plausibility checks. So sort for very low EPC and high EPC SAP scores as well. Are these likely to be correct? You'll often get, something like a G popping up, and it's actually because it's showing as having no central heating system, or actually you just go and have a look at your, again, if you're a social landlord, it's easier. Things like your gas servicing, gas kind of safety checks, or electrical EICR checks that either happen kind of yearly or kind of 5 yearly, etc. Does it show that it's got a gas boiler? Therefore, that's wrong, and we can amend that because it's just it's data inaccuracy. Understanding the limitations on data. I'm sure you'll all be aware that EPCs, etc., are certainly not perfect. They're kind of the best we have at the moment, particularly in terms of that kind of rating system and energy efficiency data, but yeah, by no means perfect. So things like old data, use old data, unless you have additional data. So, there's nothing necessarily wrong with old data, and particularly things like archetypes. The housing archetype doesn't change. Things like whether it's got a gas boiler or it's got the type of model of the gas boiler, or whether it's got a heat pump, whether it's a detached built in 1930 shouldn't change. So actually old data isn't always necessarily bad. Incorrect data, you should be able to recognize and remove kind of values, as we've kind of discussed previously, identify those inconsistencies, conflicts between data sources. So you probably come to a point where you've got two data sources that tell you slightly different things. Then you need to make that kind of value judgment in terms of what is most accurate. So actually, we've got a stock condition survey, we've got an EPC. One was done 10 years. The EPC was done 10 years ago. Stock condition survey was done 2 years ago, and actually we're really confident in that. So we can overwrite that data and use that more accurate one. And then missing data. So you'll almost certainly not have 100% of the data set you want, but how do you kind of go about kind of filling in the blanks? So that if you've got a row of terraces and you don't have EPCs for 3 of them, it is possible to clone that across with kind of some accuracy. There'll be things you can't do in terms of understanding exactly what the loft insulation is like, for instance, but archetypes will remain the same. So there's ability to clone data if you don't have anything more accurate, but you should be marking that as kind of more low confidence and then targeting those for particular surveys going forward. Understanding the limitations of your data. So there are always limitations. As I discussed kind of the limitations of EPC, but EPC data is not always the most reliable, accurate source. Particularly, let's talk about maybe in more the owner-occupier sectors where it's normally done kind of when it's rented or sold, generally at the lowest cost possible. So how long the EPC assessor has kind of stayed in that property, they may have been nudged to make it a C ideally or something like that. So you have to take them with a little pinch of salt sometimes. But then obviously if you've got kind of modeling platforms and further data, and hopefully as you go through and do those retrofit assessments, you'll get that really accurate and more granular information to overwrite it with. Kind of scale your data, so not all data may be on a postcode level. So for instance, if you happen to deal with lower super output areas, kind of middle layer super output areas, they don't always nicely align with postcode areas. So again, understanding the granularity of the data that you have and the limitations of that, and the age of the data I've discussed before. So fuel poverty data that you get from kind of the open source reporting will always kind of be 2 years behind. A lot of the open source data will be a little bit behind. Even I believe the open source EPC data is normally updated every 3 months. So it could be kind of a minimum of kind of 3 months out of date in terms of the EPCs that are available to view. So how do I analyze data? A kind of full RDSAP data set contains 120 plus fields from the EPC survey and provides the best foundation. I mean, I would actually say that a full SAP data set is better than RDSAP. Obviously, RDSAP standing for a reduced SAP, but unless you do new builds, you're almost certainly not going to have a full SAP data set. So the type of data you will be able to get if you do have that full RDSAP information is things like heat and demand. So that's the kilowatt hours per meter squared per year, telling you about that kind of heat loss. Was potentially more important than the previous waves. Things like SHGF had kind of targets for heat loss requirements as well. That has been removed in kind of current iterations of the grant funding. However, it's still not a bad thing to have targets associated with heat demand, particularly if you've got maybe fabric first principles that you're trying to adhere to. SAP scores kind of 1 to 100, G to A. It's the ranking mechanism for kind of for EPCs. You'll get things like CO2 information, CO2 equivalent, normally shown in kilograms. Sometimes you can show it in tons as well. Fuel bills always want to be taken with a pinch of salt, particularly on EPCs, particularly if you're dealing with people in fuel poverty. Those fuel bill information are, based on what is assumed to be an average household, but it's good as a comparison mechanism rather than necessarily this is how much you will save. Again, energy consumption similar in relation to kind of fuel bills. Stock attribute profiling, so kind of age, wall construction, loft insulation, you'll all get that as part of an EPC survey. Actually changes now as part of RDSAP. You'll get more detailed window insulation measurements. So previously it was just kind of there's average glazing in this property, whereas now they have to take measurements, so you should actually get more detailed information on the kind of meter squared of glazing, etc. You should get more detailed information on kind of ventilation and lighting as part of RDSAP data over the previous kind of SAP 2012 data. Hot water system specifics, again, more information on kind of things like hot water cylinders, sizes, etc. Renewables, so then now you can bring in things like PV inverters, batteries, which just weren't an option under previous iterations. So these are probably, SAP 10 is only very new. These are probably data sets that won't be available in those open source ones because no one's really started to gather in any particular kind of huge amount that kind of RDSAP data. But as you go forward, you'll have that more granular information to help you with your kind of planning and decision making. And kind of new age bands, so things like post 2023 homes, kind of making sure that you've got that kind of understanding of the better improvement homes due to building regulations as well. So analyzing your data, make your data specific to the strategy or project you're aiming to deliver. We've already kind of gone through that before, so know where you want to go before you start. There might be things that crop up halfway that you weren't aware of, but make sure you've read what does, particularly if you're focusing on things like Warm Homes Local Grant and Social Housing Fund, what am I going to be asked to report on? Let's make sure I'm collecting it now rather than scrambling later down the line when I get asked for it and I've got to turn it around in a week, let's say. Decide what tools you would like to use to analyze your data. For instance, obviously Excel, pivot tables, graphs, really accessible, really usable. There's things like Power BI that a lot of people have access to now, things like GIS mapping. There are free options of that. Things like QGIS are available, as well as possibly more on the social housing front, energy modeling platforms, things like Parity, Intelligent Energy, DREAM are available for you to do some kind of larger energy modeling, data crunching of your data. So in summary, things that if you take anything away from today, and obviously there's opportunities for questions in a little bit, but kind of summary checklist would be identify what data you need up front. So have a read through the local grant or social housing fund guidance. It should really list there, and things like your GFAs and MOUs, what are you being required to report on? Some of this you'll already be aware of, and some of the data you already would have collected for kind of bidding purposes, but actually it's good to continue to collect this information, have it there in a nice, easy, accessible format so that for the next wave, it's available straight away. Again, you're not having to scramble a project together, you know what you want to do, and you're able to kind of really take advantage of funding and opportunities as and when they arise. Have you considered what factors are important to you and your organization? So yeah, sometimes it's difficult to align funding streams with strategies, and they will sometimes or potentially often have conflicting requirements. So make sure that they actually fit together. So whether that's changing your strategy or changing your thought in terms of how you're going to go about delivery, or not using all the funding necessarily, but making sure it fits as best as it can with what you're trying to achieve as an organization, will make, again, life a lot easier when you're delivering these type of projects. Have you identified what data you will need to ensure you consider those factors? So, right, we're looking at focusing on a Fabric First project in line with the requirements of Social Housing Fund. This is the data that we're going to need. We're going to need pre and post EPCs. We're going to have to obviously show all of the PAS data. So how are we going to store and kind of utilize the information coming through from our retrofit coordinators? That is really good data, more granular than you'll get from an EPC, and it's really easy for it to get lost once you've done a project and you've got your Trustmark certificate, all that other stuff. If you haven't stored it anywhere, or you haven't got a way of translating it into your current data sets, you could easily lose it. All those pictures that got taken, all the kind of additional condition information, if you can't extract that in a usable way, it's almost a little bit of a waste of money for you collecting it all. So yeah, understand what the data you're going to have to collect and how actually that can help you in kind of improve your data sets as well. And have you considered what barriers you might encounter? Obviously, we discussed, are you working within conservation areas? Are you working with hard to treat archetypes? Are you working with DNOs that have particular issues in certain areas where you're really focusing on things like solar PV, or you're focusing on air source heat pumps? What are those barriers, and how actually can you mitigate that by understanding those barriers up front, doing early engagement with those stakeholders that hold the keys to kind of unlocking delivery, and it can take a while to go through that. So yeah, that upfront information is really important. Sourcing your data, have you checked the reliability of your source? So that might be utilizing kind of local information. So how good was that retrofit assessor, or how good was the stock condition surveyor? Was he internal? Was he an external contractor? How much validation was done? And then kind of ranking that, in terms of the validity, should I say, of the kind of sources. Have you also checked with your internal departments and colleagues with kind of local knowledge? So again, that's more in terms of what are our plans, what are our kind of upcoming programs? Again, do they align? Obviously mentioned before, and things like heat networks, but also again more on social housing, things like that planned works investment. Does it align with roofing replacements? Have you got a big window program? Whatever else it might be. Are you doing, I don't know, internal wall insulation? And it also, it would need kind of the ripping out of a kitchen. Can those be aligned together? So yeah, working with other teams to make projects work better together. Collating your data. So has all the data been collected into one centralized place? Have you created a single version of the truth, or at least as best as you can? Again, don't let the kind of perfect be the enemy of the good, but yeah, as best as you can, a single version of the truth. Have you considered modeling software? So obviously we've spoken about things like, basic Excel spreadsheets can work well. You can add on to that things like Power BI, and on top of that, there are kind of specific modeling platforms where you can put lots and lots of energy data, model, to your heart's content. What would happen if we did air source heat pumps here? What would happen if we did a loft insulation program here? And it will give you some really good outputs, assuming the data is half decent. Cleansing your data. Cleansing your data. Have you completed the logic, consistency, and plausibility checks? So yeah, going through that process. let's get the data sets, and then we can start having a look. Are there any areas which, you know, high low SAP EPCs, did the cavity and solid walls match up? Often they don't. Often you'll go to a property that the EPC says is a solid wall, but actually it's principally a cavity property with a small kind of element of solid wall, etc. So it's not always easy when you're just looking at kind of rows on an Excel spreadsheet. And often things like Google Maps as well. You know, you don't have to go out to all these properties. If you're unsure, you can Google Maps it and just double check, you know, does that make sense from an archetype point of view as well.